It was the summer of 2012. I have a late birthday, so I was still 15 when all my friends were 16. They all had jobs for the summer, but nobody would hire me because I was only 15. I started looking for off-the-books jobs on Craigslist. I found an ad titled, "Looking for House Cleaning Services, Paying $10 an Hour." The ad had two pictures of the house, one outside and one inside. It was a typical middle-class house. He lived in the next town over. The only way to contact him was by email, so I emailed him telling him I was only 15 years old and was willing to clean his house for $10 an hour. He responded in 10 minutes, telling me his work schedule and when he would need me to be available. I told him that was okay, and then he asked me if I had means of transportation to get there every day. I didn't even realize that my mom wouldn't be able to drive me every day. Oddly, he offered to give me a lift to and from every single day. He said he worked close, so coming home to give me a ride wouldn't be a problem. I agreed without even asking my mom, so the man asked for my address. I gave it to him, and he said he would be over at 8:30 a.m. on Monday to pick me up. Come Monday, I met him outside. He drove a black '05 Nissan Maxima. He himself had a black beard and a Mets hat on. He didn't seem dressed ready to go to work, but I didn't think much about that. He introduced himself as James and then dropped me off and gave me the key. He told me to just straighten everything out and such. Then he drove off in a hurry. I found it really weird that he trusted me, a 15-year-old he had never met, to be in his house alone. His house wasn't even too messy. All I did was just fold some clothes, wash some dishes, and used a hand vacuum to clean some of the carpets. The only problem, it was extremely hot in the house, even hotter than outside. It seemed all the windows were sealed shut, and I didn't want to turn on the AC without permission. This went on for 6 hours before he came back, handed me $60, and dropped me off back home. He seemed extremely nice, and I felt I had lucked out finding that ad. This went on for a good 2 weeks, and my mom was okay with it since James was actually paying me. Then, one Friday night, I woke up feeling really thirsty, so I got up to get some water. I looked out my window, and I saw somebody standing there looking into my room. I screamed, and my parents came running over, but the person outside took off before they got there. The next time I went in, it was at least 100 degrees outside. I asked James if I could turn on the AC, but he said it was broken. He told me to just take off my clothes if I got hot. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he was serious. I felt really uncomfortable after that. He dropped me off, and I did the same work that I had been doing. It was at least 105 degrees in the house. I had to work shirtless and constantly go outside where it was just a little cooler. The day dragged on, but I just barely made it through. The next day, on the way to his house, James told me that he had the day off from work. He told me he would just help me out. I was not happy to hear this. I would rather just be alone in the house. He seemed to slowly follow me into whatever room I went to clean. I eventually had to go to the bathroom, so I ran upstairs and made sure he wasn't following me. But in the bathroom, I made a shocking discovery. Up in the corner of the room, I found a small camera pointing from out of the wall, just barely visible. I scanned the room for more, and sure enough, there was one in the bottom corner as well. I started searching the whole bathroom for more cameras. I checked under the sink, but what I found was much worse. There were 2 huge stacks of VHS tapes, each one with a sticky note attached with someone's name on it. The one on the top was my name. I almost threw up then and there. I had to find a way to get home safely. James then knocked on the door, asking if I was alright. I said I wasn't feeling good, and asked if he could drive me home. He said okay. I stepped outside, and he told me he had to go as well, so he stepped into the bathroom. For the first half of the car ride, he didn't say anything to me, and the road he was taking me on wasn't familiar. In fact, I noticed that the direction we were heading in was the complete opposite of my house. Where are we going?" I asked. He looked at me and said, "What were you doing in the bathroom?" I started to panic. I didn't answer. so he asked again in a much angrier voice. We were stopped at a traffic light, so I took that opportunity to unlock the door and escape the car. I ran away from sight before calling my mom, crying into the phone, telling her to pick me up. She came over as soon as possible. She immediately reported James, and the police found the tapes under her sink. Some of the tapes contained much worse things than kids just cleaning the house. The scariest thing, some of the kids seen in the tapes are still missing to this day. He was arrested and tried for child pornography, kidnapping, and some other charges. I'm happy I jumped out of that car, because I don't know where he was taking me.
Before getting an office job in the city, I was a UPS driver for 2 years. It was good money, and I enjoyed it for the most part. It had its moments, though. It was 2010. I'd been out of college for 2 years. I was working 11 to 7 on a Thursday. It was the dead of winter, so it was dark by like 5 o'clock. I wasn't exactly living in Palm Springs either. I was living in a small town in North Carolina. I don't want to call it ghetto or slummy, but it wasn't a very nice area at all. I did deliveries in that same town very often. The housing situation in this town was weird. Some blocks would have rows of houses and trailer homes spaced far away from each other, while other blocks were just completely desolate. This made for less deliveries altogether because the houses were so spaced out and far from each other that it took longer than, say, a regular suburban or urban community. Deliveries were always marked on the map so that I could take a more strategic route instead of just driving all over the place. After hours and hours of deliveries, all over a span of at least 3 different small towns, I started heading down one of those streets I'd mentioned just now. Spaced out trailer homes and small houses on one side, forest on the other side. It's a little past 6 p.m. and my shift is winding down with not too many deliveries left. There was one house on this block, and the package was to be signed for, meaning I couldn't just leave it on the stoop. I pulled up in front of the house, went to the back of the truck, and pulled out one of the biggest and heaviest boxes of the day. There was some kind of small metal pieces bumping around in the box, lots of them. I couldn't even try to take a guess at what could be inside. My job was just to lug the thing to the front door of the trailer home, and that's just what I did. There was no doorbell in this home, so I had to knock. There were no lights on in there though, and I didn't see a car out front, so I was hoping somebody was home. I knocked a few more times, then I saw the curtains to one of the windows move, and footsteps come to the door. Then there was a long pause, a suspicious and unnecessarily long pause before the door finally cracked open. Some older woman poked her head out all paranoid-like, and when I said she had a package to sign, she opened the door fully. She seemed fidgety as I asked her to sign the device. She did so. It was a sloppy signature, too. She told me I'd need to help her carry the box into her room. I figured that would be the case. The moment I stepped into the trailer home, I got a huge whiff of some kind of stench. You know how every home has a distinct smell, whether it be good or bad? Well, this home smelled awful. I don't know what it was. She was leading me to a back section behind the tiny living room space. She took me to a narrow hallway where I struggled to carry the box, and then brought me to a door. She opened the door and told me to maneuver the box into the closet in the back of the room. I asked her to flick on the light. She said the light didn't work. It was next to pitch black in there, with the only source of light being the lamp from the living room seeping down the hall into this room. I could see just the slightest amount to navigate the box inside of the room. As I got close to the closet, I saw someone standing in the corner of the closet. I knew for certain it was a person because of the shape of the outline, and there was movement. There was no logical explanation to this. This person was clearly hiding from me, waiting. I left the box where it was and walked past the woman and said, "Have a nice day." She started to scream at me to come back and help her, then she went as far as to call me a piece of shit. I didn't know what this woman and whoever was in that closet were planning on doing, and I didn't want to stick around to find out. I went on with my shift and went home that night, and thus began my job hunt for a newer, better job. My 10-year-old son Chris had been playing that Fortnite game all day every day for the past few months, and it had been driving me insane. I would scream at him to go out once in a while. Instead, all I heard was that sound of that bus honking its horn every 10 minutes and constant gunshots coming from his room. Eventually one night at like 9 p.m., Chris came out of his room and shouted out to the kitchen that he was having someone over. I angrily asked him who. He said, "Some guy from Fortnite who lives around here." A fuse went off in my head as I heard this. Apparently he invited over some random person he was talking to on Fortnite. When I asked him how old, Chris shrugged his shoulders and said, "I don't know, he sounds kinda old." I started to freak out, knowing some random stranger who was probably well older than my 10-year-old son was coming to my house. I locked all the doors and turned on all the porch lights. I told Chris to just keep playing his game in his room and not to talk to anyone else. I waited around by the windows until a car pulled up in front of my house. It stopped and the headlights turned off. The door opened, someone came out and started walking up the pathway to my front door. I felt like my heart dropped into my stomach when I saw some middle-aged man, probably 40, mildly overweight, step into the light and then up the stairs to the front door. He rang the bell 3 times. I ignored it. Then he started pounding on the door for a bit. I ignored that as well. He walked down the stoop, looking up through the windows as he walked down the pathway. I made sure he couldn't see me. I thought for sure he'd go to his car and leave, but he went around to the side of my house, out of sight from the windows. He was actually going to my back door. I heard from around back the door being nudged, as he clearly tried to open it. I stayed put where I was. There were no other entry points to the house, so once he gave up, he would surely leave. When the noises from the back door stopped, I waited for 5 minutes in the kitchen, until I thought it was time to check. I wanted to hopefully get a look outside, so I shut the lights and lifted the blinds in the kitchen. There was the man's face, 2 inches from the glass, as he looked into the kitchen, or rather, he now looked at me. I screamed with a shake in my yell that I was calling the cops. I think that scared him off because he walked away, and I watched as he got in his car and left. I didn't call the cops though. Instead, I marched right to Chris's room and scolded him. I grounded him for 2 weeks for endangering not only the household, but himself. That meant no video games for 2 weeks, and after the 2 weeks, he would have to go 2 months without access to his wireless headset. Now that the 2 weeks are up, he's back on the game. I get sick to my stomach thinking about what would have happened if I wasn't home.